you definitely know the face on the t-shirt. It's practically the ultimate, ubiquitous symbol of radical rebellion across the globe. But before we get into the militant tactician, or the hunted guerrilla fighter, we really have to recognize the human being who actually left his family behind to pursue an uncompromising ideology. Just listen to this incredibly disarming contrast from his own daughter, Alida.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely deconstruct the life, the military strategy, and the final days of Ernesto Che Guevara. To do this accurately and impartially, we're triangulating three very distinct sources. We've got his daughter's deeply personal memories, his very own military playbook, and finally, declassified U.S. intelligence documents detailing the covert operation that led to his capture. It's an absolutely fascinating look at how revolutionary theory clashes with harsh reality.
Section 1. The Man Behind the Myth, A Daughter's Perspective.
So let's strip away that heavily politicized image for a second, because the reality is much more granular and complex. It's so interesting that Alida remembers a father who strictly refused material perks. I mean, even as one of the most powerful men in Cuba, his family lived incredibly modestly. His wife was literally sewing trousers for their kids out of old blouses. He wanted to instill this hard lesson that they had to keep their feet on the ground and earn absolutely everything themselves. It's quite a striking contrast to the immense power he actually held.
Take a look at this brief, incredibly tragic farewell letter he left for his children. It really highlights the deeply personal cost of the path he chose. He wrote this knowing full well that his decision to export revolution abroad would likely result in his death. To Alida, who read this when she was just a small child, it was the exact moment she understood she no longer had a father. He was gone, totally consumed by his tactical ambitions.
Moving right along to Section 2, The Guerrilla Playbook, Strategy and Tactics from 1961.
All right, looking at the actual rules he laid out in his 1961 manual, Guerrilla Warfare, we see a blueprint designed for uprisings all across Latin America. His entire military theory relied on the guerrilla acting as a social reformer. The absolute necessity of popular peasant support was central to this doctrine. To win that support, the guerrilla had to champion agrarian reform, basically giving land back to the people. Because without the locals providing food, shelter, and intelligence, those hit-and-run tactics of his small vanguard simply could not survive against a massive conventional army. No way.
And this brings us to a tactic he brilliantly called the minuet. Yeah, named after the dance. It perfectly illustrates his focus on total mobility and psychological attrition. Instead of engaging in a bloody frontal assault, small teams of 5 or 6 men would fire from one direction, retreat as the enemy advanced, and then another team would strike from a totally different angle. It's like a giant, deadly puzzle designed to exhaust and immobilize a much larger force, draining their morale without taking major guerrilla casualties.
Section 3. Adapting to the battlefield. Terrain dictates tactics.
Now imagine you're a guerrilla fighter. Your survival relies entirely on how you adapt to the environment around you. Guevara's manual clearly defined how to exploit geography. Notice the stark contrast here. Favorable, rugged ground like thick forests or steep mountains allowed for larger bases, hospitals, and long-range weapons like the M1 Garand. But unfavorable ground, like open plains or suburban areas, that required extreme secrecy, constant running, and operating strictly at night in tiny groups of just 10 to 15 men. Out in the open, one mistake meant total annihilation.
Then there's this fascinatingly ruthless logistical rule about ammunition. The doctrine strictly mandated that every dead enemy soldier was simply a source of weapons and ammo. Because guerrillas don't have supply chains, a fighter must never enter a battle they cannot win and subsequently loot. Basically, if you shoot all your bullets and don't capture more from the enemy, you've essentially lost the engagement, regardless of the actual body count.
Which leads us to Section 4, the Bolivian Campaign. Theory meets reality in 1967.
So, in late 1966, Che sneaks into Bolivia on forged Uruguayan passports to put these exact theories to the ultimate test. Why Bolivia? Well, it bordered 5 other countries, making it the perfect hub to export revolution across South America. And initially, it worked. From March to August 1967, his small band inflicted heavy losses on the Bolivian military. But this success triggered a really swift, calculated counterinsurgency response. The United States actually deployed Green Berets to train the Bolivian 2nd Ranger Battalion, specifically to hunt Guevara down.
Now check out this declassified intelligence. It brilliantly isolates exactly why this doctrine failed in Bolivia. Remember his golden rule about the absolute necessity of peasant support? He just didn't have it.
The local population feared his fighters and actively informed the army. On top of that, local communist parties fractured and outright refused to back him. Trapped in a rugged canyon without supplies or public backing, his own foundational rule had completely crumbled beneath him.
And that brings us to our final chapter. Section 5. Capture and Execution. The Final Days. The declassified documents give us this really grim, minute-by-minute timeline, where the hunter officially becomes the hunted. It shows a rapid, catastrophic collapse of his forces. On September 26th, his vanguard was wiped out at a village called La Higuera. By October 7th, his final diary entry actually notes paying a peasant woman 50 pesos to keep quiet, which is a bitter irony given his total reliance on organic peasant loyalty. The very next day, trapped in a ravine at Quebrada del Lloro, he was shot in the leg, his gun was knocked away, and he was captured.
When the 2nd Ranger Battalion finally apprehended him, they sent a frantic, encrypted radio burst back to command. "Hello, Saturna, we have Papa." Papa was the code name for their primary target. That message confirmed that the U.S.-trained unit had successfully cornered the man who literally wrote the book on guerrilla warfare.
Let's look at the actual bureaucratic steps of his death, because they are chilling. On the morning of October 9th, CIA agent Felix Rodriguez arrived by helicopter. Now, according to the documents, the CIA's preference was actually to keep Che alive for interrogation. However, the Bolivian command wanted an immediate end to the threat. At 10 a.m., they issued code 500 and 600, the direct order to execute. By 1:10 p.m., a Bolivian sergeant named Jaime Terán carried out that order.
According to multiple debriefings from the guys in the room, these were his totally defiant last words to the trembling Sergeant Terán right before the fatal shots were fired. He stood up, refused to remain seated, and faced his executioner. It was a stark, brutal end to a man whose writings had sparked conflicts all across the globe.
The immediate aftermath was highly calculated, and honestly, pretty gruesome. His body was strapped to a helicopter, flown to Valle Grande, and heavily photographed to prove to the world he was dead. Argentine police amputated his hands for definitive fingerprint verification, and he was secretly buried beneath a dirt airstrip. But here's the thing. While his enemies tried to literally erase his physical presence, back in Cuba, Fidel Castro immediately delivered a eulogy to 1 million people, instantly crafting the martyr myth that would define Che Guevara's historical image forever.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a really massive question. Did the cold, tactical elimination of Ernesto Guevara actually defeat his ideology? Or did the manner of his death cement his legacy for generations to come? The documents show a flawless military victory for the counterinsurgency, for sure, but the decades since have shown the absolutely unstoppable power of a martyr's image. What do you think? I hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer understanding of the man, the manual, and the mission. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.